Okay, everybody, thank you for coming. Welcome to the Walter T. Bailey mural dedication. I'm going to say straight up, because this will also help me not be so nervous, that I'm not that great at giving speeches, so you just all get to bear with me, and I'm probably going to pace around a little bit. But thank you all for coming. Thank you for sitting out here in this heat. Luckily, it didn't rain like it was supposed to yesterday, so we're all pretty blessed right now. I'll just dive right in. I made a little noise, but not very much. Walter T. Bailey's first mention was in the Star Courier on January 20th, 1892, when he would have been about in the 4th grade, describing a class trip down to Central from his school, West Brick, where Irving now stands. He made a little noise, but not very much. He was the son of freed slaves, one of 3 surviving children out of 10. His father died when he was 6, leaving his pregnant mother to keep the household together. His older brothers, Henry and Harry, became barbers and supported the family. Little Walter was allowed to dream. At Kewanee High School, he was a popular and active student. A fullback on the football team, he was in the architect club, and we had one, as well as various other extracurricular activities like the glee club and the speech recital team. One of the few black kids in the school at that time, he often attended parties hosted by white students. His school photos show him with a cool demeanor, the calm face of a young man who knew that he was going places. He went off to college at the University of Illinois. His parents, when they moved to Kewanee in 1868, couldn't read or write. Their son was the first black student to receive his bachelor's degree from the U of I School of Architecture, making him the first black architect in Illinois. He later earned his master's from the same institution. Under the watch of Booker T. Washington, Walter T. Bailey, now married with a young daughter, moved his family to the Tuskegee Institute, where he eventually led the mechanical engineering department. He designed 2 large buildings and several smaller buildings while teaching students his craft. He seemed to have a knack for churches, even claiming churches a specialty on his business cards and letterhead. In Alabama, he designed the historical Brick-a-Day Church, a landmark of the civil rights movement. In Chicago, he designed the now landmarked officially First Church of Deliverance. In between, he held his own practice in Memphis, Tennessee, doing work on churches, banks, and several contracts for the Knights of Pythias organization. He also designed a building that is now part of the Mosaic Templar Cultural Center, and that is now on the National Register of Historic Places. In Chicago, he became the go-to for architecture in the Bronzeville neighborhood. He's revered as something of a grandfather to black architecture, and those he mentored continued to design the buildings that shaped lives. He died in 1941 at age 59, with his wife and daughters by his side. He had just designed the Ida B. Wells housing project in Chicago. His family was celebrated during his day in Kewanee. His mother's 80-year birthday party made news, as did her death and Walter's. Their visits warranted articles. He had an impressive resume. You could argue that he had, in fact, made a little bit of noise. Between Chicago, Little Rock, and here in Kewanee, 2018 certainly has felt like the year of Walter Bailey. There were many in this town, myself included, that hadn't grown up hearing about Walter, and that's a shame. His daughters had no children. He had nieces and nephews, but the last Kewanee resident died in 1968, and his niece and nephew relocated to Los Angeles. There was no one around to tell his tale. He didn't make the list of wall dogs in 2013, the wall dogs murals. Gail Gerard had tried in vain to make sure his name stayed on Kewanee's Wikipedia page, and it kept getting removed as incorrect information. But we're here now. He didn't make the larger meat, but he got his own year. He got to make a little more noise. At the beginning of this year, we started researching for this mural. It became something of an adventure novel that we couldn't stop reading. We wanted to know everything we could about Walter. His story became fascinating. There was always new information cropping up. He got all of our attention. He didn't have to share it with 14 other subjects. That special attention led us to Tara Bailey and Painter, his great-great-niece and her son. It reconnected her with her past, with roots her father had longed for, with a great aunt she didn't know she had, living about a half an hour away, no less. We've researched so much on Walter T. Bailey, I'm at the point where I feel like I'm on a first-name basis with him. And I could go on for hours about him, as the sound of my voice right now, or anyone who's talked to me over the last 4 months could tell you. That's my mom. like to quote my younger cousin Ethan. He told me once that really, Kewanee was this little town that no one should have ever heard of. But that we have people that come out of this town, leave our mark on the world, and we end up with a strange variety of people all over who know of our town. Walter would be example A. Because of his life and career, our town has connections to part of this country and parts of history that we never would have imagined. I like to tell people when describing my hometown that there's this "I'll show you" attitude that we seem to grow here. Who we're showing is different to each of us. A rival, a naysayer, society, expectations, the norm, whatever it is, there's a drive. It's even reflected in the words of the Kewanee School song. Hilariously, it is even in the write-up of one of Walter's football games against Cambridge. It's in that binder there. A 14-0 loss in 1897. It says, quote, "The Kewanee lads, although defeated in the score, were not vanquished in spirit, and are still confident that a game can be won or can be played in which they will win." On ever on. And I wish all sports articles today were written like those. That was great to read, so check them out. But that's what I see in Walter's face up on this mural. In his portrait, that was the source material. He showed us, he showed them, he made some noise, he did what he set out to do. His story should inspire Kewaneans today. We wanted him up on a wall to do just that, to send the message to our kids that they can go out there and make some noise and take a page from Walter's book and just do it. Like him. He did it with such confidence. He was one of us through and through. This was a group effort, and I have many to thank. First of all, I have to thank Dave Clark. This really is all his fault. He's right up front. He brought Walter back to us in 2006, and then after the Neville Brand mural in 2014. He kept it all going each February with new information during Black History Month. He went deep, deep down the Walter Bailey rabbit hole. And I think that the only way he's going to be able to cope with a life post-Walter info is to find a new rabbit hole to explore. He's great at what he does, both in writing and in research. I could say so much more, but there are other names on this list. I'd like to thank Scott Cornbread Lindley. He was our mural designer. He was our project leader. He put this together. He encouraged me on the Wall Dog side of this project. He gathered our team of Michael Clark, who's standing there next to him, and Joy Care, and made this happen. He painted Walter's face here, Cornbread did, even down to the light color eyes that we discovered that his father had, that Tara has. He made this crazy mural idea real. With him, I'd like to thank Michael Clark and Joy Care for their work this weekend. That was some weather. We had hot days, rain, humidity. You brought your skills, your design judgment, your dedication, and we thank you. And from the Wall Dog side, I'd also like to thank Nancy Bennett, who set up the Wall Dog Public Art, a nonprofit that allowed us to accept donations and sponsorships from far-flung groups and organizations, and who was very patient with me, as I've honestly not fundraised anything since I had to sell cheese and sausage at St. Paul's in grade school. I'd like to thank our hosts, Rob and Leanne Ballou of B&B Printing. They let us put our mural here. They gave their building a little bit of a makeover in anticipation. They let us use their building for logistics and their scissor lift and their parking lot. And fun note, their house was designed by Henry Eklund, Walter's mentor. I'd like to thank Chuck Kuntz and Great Dane and his staff for the panels and installation help, and Tim Sheets for his lift, his time, and his know-how. I'd like to thank Denny and Diane Packey for their know-how, their assistance on so many things, from collecting donations to advising on how we've done murals in the past, to bringing the Wall Dogs here to Kewanee in the first place, and for the sound system. The Kewanee Arts Council for accepting local donations and enabling Kewaneans to each be part of this mural. I'd like to thank my intrepid Scooby Squad. Oh, hi, Painter. Hi, buddy. I'd like to thank my intrepid Scooby Squad. I've joked that if I ever go missing, please sick these folks on it, because I know they'll find me. I joke, but it's true. Yeah, they will find. They found you. Steve Morrison, Rose Melbourne, Marla Millman-Roth, you found Tara, just going off this phrase from Genevieve. Well, my brother had a little boy with the preacher's daughter. Can you find him too? You're still finding tidbits and connecting dots, and you're amazing for it. Larry and Pat Locke and Mike DeWalt of the Historical Society, thank you for your research and time and the wonderful video. We have quite a bit of information coming your way for your archives. Whoever now needs to know anything about Walter, the Kewanee Historical Society will be the go-to spot. I need to thank my family, Peggy Faber and Councilman Steve Faber, for their logistical support and updates for me in Kewanee while I was in Indy. My dad, John Hernandez, and my husband, Troy Butler, and for all of them, for having to listen to endless stories and updates about my new pal, Walter, for this whole year and part of last year. I'd like to thank our Facebook planning group, Tom and Angie Washburn, David Currier, Councilman Chris Colomer, Katie Shook, Diana DeSmit, and many others. Even if it was just responding with a like to an update or words of encouragement, that was helpful in pulling this off. A round of applause for painters, just cuz. Thank you to Marcus Thronberg for hosting us at Center City, and I finally said it right. Thank you to Wanda and Warren Keefe for spoiling us with so much tasty food while we painted the mural. Necessary. Our research took us all over this country, especially in the quest to find a copy of Walter's blueprints. We really wanted to put his architect's signature on this wall, and it's right under the church. So thank you to, and I'll list them all through. Gail Rost of the University of Illinois, especially for your encouragement so early on. Kwesi Daniels of Tuskegee University. Mike Waldinger of the American Institute of Architects Illinois chapter, and he's in attendance. Christina Schutt of the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center in Little Rock, Arkansas. The think tank of the Museum of Science and Industry. Marshall Jones here in Kewanee. Dana Chandler of Tuskegee University. Brian Hudson of the National Organization of Minority Architects. Dean Illingworth of the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. Julian Grace from Wish TV. He had to listen to quite a bit at work. Logan Skidmore from Wish TV. Anita Meckler from the Black Metropolis Research Consortium in Chicago. Dan O'Connell from the Chicago Architecture Foundation. Michelle Costenson from the Community State Bank here. Melinda Edwards from the City of Kewanee. Maurice Macklin and Pastor Bryson from the First Church of Deliverance in Chicago. Richard Bailey, no relation to our Walter, in Montgomery, Alabama. Pastor E. Baxter Morris of the, whoops, hang on. All the weather has to do is just abide for about an hour. That's all we ask. Okay. Pastor E. Baxter Morris of the First Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, also known as the Brick a Day Church. He allowed his church to be pictured in our mural. And now I'd like to thank our sponsors and our donors. The American Institute of Architects, Illinois chapter and Prairie chapter, the University of Illinois, the Prairie Chicken Festival, Boss Manufacturing, Mary Ann Spiegel, Ronell Spiegel, Nancy Sutton, Marla Millman-Roth, Tim Pratt, Steve Morrison, Larry and Pat Locke, Bill Bowen, David Thompson, Mike Waldinger, Tony Smith, Wanda and Warren Keefe, Larry and Sharon Perkins, Judy Spiker Larson, Paul Kempen, Sandra Johnson Neighbors, Mari Stevenson, Moon Stump, Becky Zetterberg, Jamie Townsend, Patrick Kelly, Kathleen McAfee, Michelle Dyer, our first donor, Robin Mayberry Hembry, and Bill and Lori Christensen for putting us over the top as our last donors. Thank you to our anonymous donors. You know who you are. I'd also like to thank Mrs. Sue Blake and Doris Strand for their help on the mural. Your signatures are up there, thanks to Michael Clark. And to Mrs. Blake for all the teaching you gave me over the years. And now, I'd like to give Dave Clark the mic because he's got a few words to say. This is about your range.
This is completely impromptu. I thought I said everything I was supposed to say Thursday night up at Center City. But I guess a little background, Joy wanted me to fill in some blanks here. And first of all, I got sucked into the Walter Bailey rabbit hole first of the year, January. And I thought, you never want to sell Joy Hernandez Butler short. But I thought she was really taking on a big task to come up with $10,000 for a mural by Prairie Chicken Days. I thought for sure we were going to be doing this next year. Well, just look out, you know. Here we are. Obviously, there it is. There Joy is, and that sort of thing. Many, many years ago, I was accosted on the sidewalk in front of the Star Courier one day by two young African-American women who were attacking me for not writing a column about Martin Luther King on his birthday. And I tried to explain to them that my columns are all about local people, and they said, well, write about some local black people, African-American people. And that got me to thinking that there is a whole history of the African-American community in Kewanee that had never been recorded, had never been researched, and not intentionally, it just never got compiled anywhere. And I suppose you could say the same thing about the Swedes or the Belgians or the Germans or even today the Hispanic community. But when I started looking into various people I knew about, like Udell Watts and Mickey Bates and a few of those people, there were so many rich, wonderful stories. And it was in July of 2005, every week I go to the library and I do my research for the 10, 25, 50 years ago column. Lo and behold, there on July 25th, 1905, 100 years ago, was a story about this young man from Kewanee who had been appointed the head of the School of Architecture at Tuskegee University by Booker T. Washington. I had heard of Tuskegee, I'd heard of Booker T. Washington, but I had never heard of Walter Thomas Bailey. And that's where this all started, was just literally stumbling across that article. Like Joy pointed out, most of Walter's family died off here in Kewanee in the 40s. There was one nephew that was still here till 68. But that's why people have asked, well, how come nobody here is known? And as she found out, all these people that she contacted, the Institute of Architects, University of Illinois, Tuskegee, the Cultural Center in Little Rock, all of them instantly knew who Walter Bailey was because of his connection with their buildings or whatever. And I thought how ironic that is that nobody in Kewanee in this generation has ever heard of this guy. So that's how I got involved and started doing the research and got on the Walter Bailey bandwagon. One thing that, and of course I started doing stories then, of course, on figures and events and so forth in African-American history here in Kewanee. And it sort of became an ongoing thing. Well, the thing that this whole experience has taught me in researching Walter Bailey is how accepted the African-American community has pretty much always been in Kewanee. The first group came here from Missouri during the Civil War, and after that they were more or less, his dad, Emanuel Bailey, was called for jury duty in 1876. He and another, they called him colored back then, and to think of while things were going on in the South that you wouldn't believe with segregation and everything, in Kewanee these people were on juries. Walter, in the story she was telling you about from the West Brick down here where they walked down to Center for tests, in his little essay that they printed in the paper, he said that I sat with my friends Henry and Olaf. Okay, Henry could be an African-American brother, cousin, friend, but I'll guarantee you that his friend Olaf wasn't black. But clear back then, and of course his experience at the high school and everything, several people, Mike Waldinger, where's Mike? Is Mike here? I believe she said, there he is. He made a comment that says so much about Kewanee, is that how we've been such an accepting society of the African-American population, that has been here through the years. Another story I wanted to share too about that I didn't get to pass along on Thursday night, about this Brick-a-Day Church, Ripley Street First Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Walter designed that while he was at Tuskegee, which was about 40 miles away from Montgomery, which is the state capital of Alabama. But long after it was built, in 1961, there was a thing going on in America called the Freedom Riders. And they were college students that started in Washington. They took 2 Greyhound and Trailways buses. They were going from Washington to New Orleans. They got held up in Montgomery. One bus was burned, the other one was turned over. And about 20 or so of these Freedom Riders, these young white and black and college students, sought refuge in this church. And that night, they had some civil rights speakers come and talk to them and about 1,000 other people, including Dr. Martin Luther King. And Dr. King and the minister, Ralph Abernathy, and there was a young student named John Lewis, who is now a congressman from Georgia, who we see on the news all the time. He's that little short black bald guy that's always criticizing President Trump. And he's still a civil rights activist. And they were all in that church. That night, a mob came around the church, started throwing bricks through the windows. They tried to set the building on fire. And Martin Luther King, at 3 o'clock that morning, got on the phone to Attorney General Robert Kennedy in Washington from that church and pleaded for help, because the local police and the local state troopers were just standing by while the mob was going to, burn down the church. Bobby Kennedy sent out, federalized the Alabama National Guard, and they came out and escorted the people out of that church to safety. It's now called the Siege of First Baptist. It's now a civil rights landmark. Anybody that knows civil rights has heard of the Siege of First Baptist. And what it did was, up to that point, the Kennedy brothers, Bobby and his brother, the president, were supposedly lukewarm to the civil rights issue. It was something in the South, and it was something that should be a state's issue and so forth. And it was the Siege of First Baptist that got the Kennedys on board for what became the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So anyway, that is also part. I'm glad they picked that for the subject for the mural, because that's probably, of all the buildings that Walter built, that's probably the one that has the most national historic significance. So anyway, congratulations to Joy and the Scooby Squad and everybody. This has been a real trip. I must say something also too for Kewanee Public Library, the Henry County Genealogical Society, and the Kewanee Historical Society. They joined up and have taken all the microfilms of the old papers going clear back to 1857 up to 1979 now, and this has cost quite a bit of money. So if you want to donate something, we've got to go from 79 on forward. But you can go on their website, Kewanee Newspapers, you can bracket your dates, put in your subject, and you can find out, and this is where I've gone nuts. I'm going to have to go to rehab after this, because everything I ever wanted to know, I can just Google it now on the library website, and that's where this Walter Bailey stuff came from. We never would have found stuff if it wasn't for that. The little stories about, the fourth grade, experience and all that kind of stuff. It's just been a big part of making this a success, so I want to give them a plug. Okay?
Thank you, Dave. And if it makes you feel any better, we did find a tombstone that said Nikola Tesla in the cemetery. So you can start digging into that one tomorrow. We got to know how's Nikola Tesla in Kewanee, Illinois? The one next to Kewanee High School. And now, Mr. Steve Morrison would like to give a special presentation to Tara.
What we have, I was able to find a marriage license, went over to Cambridge and got it certified, and it had Walter's mom and dad on it, and I presented that to Tara on Thursday. And what I have here is a copy of all the newspaper articles. I think there's 128 of them on here. And I'd like to present that to Tara and her mother Nancy. And the barber shop, for some of you people, I found that's also on the disc, but it was at 305 North Main Street. This is an article about that.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Thank you for all of your research. And now, I'll let her set, if you wanted to say a few more. Oh, yes. Let her set down her funeral prices. Yeah, I'll make sure they doesn't blow more.
Hi, I'm Tara Bailey, and yeah, just my name. But when Joy contacted me in April, I didn't know that it would lead to this. I didn't know anything about this. And some of you know and some of you don't from the article that we were kind of the secret of the family. My grandmother didn't tell us about my father's family, so we didn't know anything. And so when she contacted me, it was, to say the least, an emotional roller coaster. And so it's been just a complete joy. I didn't even plan that. It's been a complete joy to be here, to meet so many people that were so involved in my history that I had no idea about. Learning about Walter has just changed me. There's no better word for it, just changed me. And I'm so grateful to all of you that have participated in this, that did the painting, that did the Scooby Squad digging, that had any part in this. I'm so grateful to all of you for doing this for Walter and for finding me so that I knew my history. That's why it was so important for us to be here. And my son, who keeps ruining all of this, will someday look back on all of it and be so happy he was here. I'm so proud to be a member of Walter's family, and I'm so proud to have met all of you. And Joy, you're just amazing. She's just amazing. Everybody was clapped for but her, and she's just amazing. Oh yes, and one thing that came up on Thursday was that Emmanuel Bailey, who is a black man, was listed in the Army as, or in the military as having blue eyes, and they thought, the Scooby Squad, Mr. Morrison, thought that it was a typo or it was written down incorrectly. But then I said, no, that's incorrect. My father had blue eyes, and I have blue eyes, and my son has blue eyes, and we thought it came. We didn't know where it came from, but we had no idea. But as a result, we have now found where my eyes come from, because they're not actually the same color as my mother's, and neither is my son's. They're the same color as my father's, which came down from Emmanuel Bailey, which came down from Walter. So it was a really cool revelation on Thursday night. So that was the biggest thing for me. So again, thank you all so much for sitting out in this heat and for being here and for being part of this. It means the world.
And now we have a kind of a little special part of the presentation. Cornbread's going to come up here with some paint. And we have a few signatures left to add. We've got the signatures of our painters so far. We've got Scott Lindley, we've got Michael Clark, we've got Joy Kerr and me. We've got Mrs. Blake, we've got Doris Strand. But we need a painter on this wall.
Come on, baby.
And we're gonna try really hard not to get paint on his nice little outfit.
Oh, it's clothes. We'll get it.
So I'm gonna step out of the way with the mic and all that good stuff so you guys can see. Thank you, Michael Clarkin, for Cornbread for participating in that, and thank you to Tara and Painter for your work on our mural. And now we have Ricardo Montoya Picasso from Representative Sherry Bustos' office that would like to read a letter from the Congresswoman.
Wasn't it a very nice weather for this, right? So hot. Hopefully this cloud can go over, and it's kind of hot and being on a tie right now. But Joy, thank you so very much for inviting the Congresswoman. Unfortunately, she was not able to be here, but that's why she has representatives to come to events such as like this. But she sends her best regards for the work that you're doing for the communities. So, but she sends a message and it reads, "Dear friends, thank you for inviting me to attend the Walter T. Bailey mural dedication ceremony in Kewanee, Illinois, the birthplace of an extraordinary trailblazer. I regret that I'm not able to join you. However, I want to take this time to give you all the best in celebrating the legacy of the state of Illinois' first African-American architect. Mr. Bailey triumphed the limitation for success during a time when African Americans were not treated as equals. And today, we honor a man that thrived in innovation and made a significant contribution to the field of architecture. Mr. Bailey lent his talent to several national historical landmarks and churches throughout Illinois and southern states. Some of his more notable works include Chicago's Black Metropolis, a center for African American culture, business, and innovation. He also designed many campuses, buildings, and was later appointed by Booker T. Washington to be the head of the architectural department at the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. Additionally, during the Civil Rights era, Bailey drew the plans for the Ripley Street Baptist Church, right there, which stood as a refuge for the freedom fighters in Montgomery, Alabama. I cannot express how proud I am to be a resident of Illinois and to celebrate Mr. Bailey's contribution to our state's history with you today. I want to thank all the individuals who contributed to the creation of this beautiful piece of art. I also want to recognize Joyce Hernandez, right here, Butler, for her organization to this noteworthy project and for gathering community support to make this possible. This mural will serve as a constant reminder that when a community comes together, anything is possible. You are all shining example of why. Sorry. Yes, a little warm. Example of why I am honored to represent the hard-working people of the Illinois 17th Congressional District. Sincerely, Sherry Bustos, Member of Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Montoya, for joining us. Thank you to Congresswoman Sherry Bustos for her kind words. Walter is just making a lot of noise. Yeah, I just had it. We're almost done, I promise. We also have State Representative Dan Swanson in attendance today. He's just waving, but he didn't want to give a few words. But we do have Mike Waldinger from the American Institute of Architects, Illinois chapter, that would like to give a few words. They were our largest sponsor for this mural.
Thank you, and thanks, Joy. I, too, got the phone call from Joy, like many other sponsors did. She had two things to explain. First was Kewanee. I'm like, I know where Kewanee was. I grew up less than 70 miles down the road. The second thing was she kind of had to explain a little bit about who Walter Bailey was, and I said, of course Walter Bailey is known by the architects of Illinois. He was the first African-American architect in the state that was the first to license architects all the way back in 1897. So we couldn't say yes fast enough to get on board with this project. and we couldn't be more proud of how it turned out. It is beautiful. It's a great representation of a lot of the other public art that exists in this city, and lines up right there with it, and maybe one of the best examples of it. So thanks to the Wall Dogs and all the creative energy that went behind it, and all the other sponsors as well. What an amazing story that this man has lived in 59 years. He was part of, and he actually shaped so many things. He went to the first public university school of architecture, the second anywhere in the country behind MIT, and his story is Kewanee's story. It is the architect's story. He was #1 of what is now 117 African-American architects in Illinois up to the present day. He studied at a land-grant institution, which was Abraham Lincoln's ideal of educating the public and not just the elites. He got his start here in a place that let him go forward based on how hard he was going to work and how far his talent would take him, and not on his social class or his race. And then from school, he went to help establish with the first African-American architect in the nation, the Tuskegee Institute. And after doing that, he came back to Chicago and was part of the Great Migration North, along with so many other families, and helped establish a community in that town that is still known today as Bronzeville. And then some of his works have been part of huge chapters in history, as Dave Clark said. So just an amazing story for a man from Kewanee, Illinois. He not only lived it, he shaped these pivotal moments in American history that we all know so well from history, and that we can be proud of, that he came here from Kewanee, from Illinois, and is an architect. So thank you for letting us be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walden, for your generous support. The Mosaic Templar Cultural Center wasn't able to join us from Little Rock, as they are receiving a special accreditation in a ceremony tomorrow, but they did send along a proclamation that I will now read on their behalf. Whereas Walter T. Bailey was the first African-American architect in Illinois who broke barriers while designing buildings that made history, and whereas Walter T. Bailey was the first African-American to graduate from the University of Illinois Architectural Engineering Programming, and whereas Walter T. Bailey designed 4 buildings in the state of Arkansas, 2 in Little Rock and 2 in Hot Springs, and whereas the Arkansas State Temple of the Mosaic Templars of America is still standing in Little Rock, and the Woodman of Union Hotel and Bath House is still standing in Hot Springs, and whereas the Arkansas State Temple of the Mosaic Templars of America building served as the meeting place for the Mosaic Templars of America in Arkansas. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Christina M. Schutt, the Director of Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, Little Rock, Arkansas, proclaim this 15th day of July 2018 that we will honor the accomplishments of Walter T. Bailey at the Arkansas State Temple of the Mosaic Templars of America in the state of Arkansas, and particularly Little Rock, where this building now stands and is currently being renovated. I invite the community to visit this building standing in downtown Little Rock, and through the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center program titled Designing Tomorrow, a Lesson on Architecture, which includes Mr. Bailey's work, we hope to encourage young African Americans to pursue their talents in the area of architecture as we continue to honor the legacy of Mr. Walter T. Bailey. Christina M. Schutt, the museum director. And now to bring this to a close, because it's hot out here. Yeah! Then I get a second. I'd like to dedicate this mural to the family of Walter Thomas Bailey, be they on this plane or the next. We remember you, we know you, you are Kewanee, and you are not forgotten. Walter lived the spirit of this town, and may he inspire Kewaneans for generations. Let's make some noise for Walter T. Bailey. And a final note, this won't be the last of Kewanee's murals either. We have a voting jar set up on this table along with some suggestions, but the ballots are blank. Please cast a vote for whoever you'd like to see on the 18th mural. It can be one of the suggestions or whoever you've thought up. There are just 2 rules: no living person and no existing businesses. We have a donation jar for the Mural Maintenance Fund so that we can keep our murals looking their best for as long as possible. And we have a research binder full of Walter Bailey's artifacts. Please flip through it. There are so many wonderful pieces in here. Thank you all for attending today, and thank you all for all of your help, and everybody that's had to listen to this for 4 minutes. Thank you.